It's now 30 years that I photograph architecture, so quite early on I realized that there's a sense of impossibility, that to photograph space or to communicate what is a space is quite hard with a simple photograph. I like photography because it's very direct, very simple, it's bidimensional. Very soon I started to realize, instead of competing with this overwhelming experience, because you go there and you smell and you feel, you know maybe the plan from, because you're an architect, you get cold, I mean there's so many different feelings. Instead of competing and having, I think in architecture there's a lot of very nervous image, which are like wide angle, over color, I said, okay, I'm not architecture, I'm photography, I reduce, I make details, I make black and white, I go and try to make you feeling maybe one aspect, but also I'm not trying to reconstruct the place you have to go, but maybe I'm more interested to make you dreaming about the place. It's like reading a description in a book. You make your own image, and that's for me the big achievement. I've seen so many different spaces, historical space, new space, space for everyday life, a space for celebrating event, and it's quite amazing the amount of thought that there is behind a piece of architecture. And this, when I started to work, I didn't realize, and it's very enriching to realize that there's a world of reference, of poetry, of understanding. So from space, from the work of the architect, you learn a lot. But a good space also helps you to define yourself. Some space make you feeling strong, some space makes you feeling lost, some space help you to concentrate. So I think without realizing, we are all the time dialoguing with the space which are around us. So it's endless kind of dialogue and learning and getting rich by visiting different spaces. Recently I was in Korea photographing traditional spaces, and it's fantastic. It's very different from the Chinese or from the Japanese. It's very much in contact with the nature, with how things are made in nature, and you learn from it. I think over the years it's been quite clear that some architecture, some works fit more the way I look at it, and it will be a good collaboration. I'm now quoting Peter Zumthor, but the way he works in a very direct way, the way he looks at material and light and situation and atmosphere and wants to create something very direct, very clear. It's definitely, it works well with the way I photograph space. But on the other side, you know, if you think about Zaha Hadid, it's completely the opposite. And still we had 30 years of collaboration. So you can't say it's one style. But maybe there's a sense of, I think, to want to be very absolute that will fit well the way I work. I can't put a style to it, but there's a way of working that will make the collaboration rich. John Hedrick, which was one of the first architects that I photographed, told me this beautiful, he said beautiful things. He said, "Oh, Hélène, in your photograph, I see the first dream I had before to start to make the building. So what a wonderful things to do." And on the other end, one Zaha wrote that in some of the photographs, they took inspiration for the next building. So those two extremes, I thought they're very beautiful. I also like to work a lot with young architects that I can see they have potential. It's fresh. There's not too much media pressure. The image is not defined, and I see this quality of work. And there we talk a lot because they also have to learn what sort of image they would like to have. For a long time, I was thinking about challenge in my work, and because I've been photographing mostly architects that deal with a lot with stone, with light, with concrete, with Zaha Hadid, and I thought, what about working with something very transparent, very light, and really even changing a bit the technique that I'm used. So in that case, I think the work of Sejima will be wonderful, especially the early work. So I hope one day. Early on, I photographed in a theater, and that was an amazing experience. There is a sensibility that created bit by bit the fact that the performance comes out of darkness, then it appears. So for me, light and shadow has always been very important, and the idea that the same way let's say in the music you have silence to start a piece to the beginning of the end. In photography, you need blackness to kind of surround the subject to bring it out. So it's this moment that structures a lot. But the way of photographing, it's completely different. It's a performance, it's very fast, you need fast camera, you have anticipated movement. But I also interested in photographing landscape, and I think the landscape for me is an extension of the space which is built by human being, by building. So it's quite similar. The way I compose the image, the way I walk around and look for I look for a diagonal, I look for something that's changed, I look for traces. I don't do the big photograph where you see the mountains. I think the photographing landscape is always connected with the walk, so with this evolution of the form. So it is not different. Over the years, there's been lots of change in photography and architecture photography and the way we communicate image. In the beginning, it was very exciting. It's been scaring, all sorts of different moments. Nowadays, I don't work digital. I work on film. I decided not to change. I decided to keep this slowness, to make a product that I can touch. And especially to keep that type of concentration that you work with an analog, which is like in a performance, you have to give all yourself in a moment, you can't change it after, which allowed me to connect with something in a different way. Because in the end, it's not a much difference if the light is touching a sensor or is touching a film, it's what are the consequences. But then recently I realized that something is drastically changed, that before the architect has even thought about how he's going to show his building, what sort of photographer, what sort of newspaper, it's already online, it's already seen. So maybe it's very hard for the architect, but for the photographer it's almost a liberation. The kind of aspect of the building is already known. I can work and just show what I think is important. So there's a kind of almost split in between the two. One is communicates some kind of concept or aspect of the building. The other one is wanted to make a piece of work about a piece of architecture. So in the end, it's great. So
there's an opportunity there.
It gives a release of something that I don't need. But it is also difficult. You start to photograph a building, there's already thousands of images online. So there's more. I say, well, I'm not needed. But then, of course, there's always something different you can do. In general, photography has a great tradition of women. I must say, it's not a new. It's not a profession where we have. It's new, the fact that we have to establish ourselves, like architecture, like conducting an orchestra. Photography has a huge tradition of women. Nowadays, I don't know why many young photographers decided maybe more to go for reportage or for maybe because I never had any felt of being discriminated, never. I felt there's a body of work that started with Berenice Abbott and many other photographers that have done building in difficult conditions, climbing be on top of cranes, doing the creation of New York. And so I never felt that people were looking at me or said, not. I would say that maybe because a lot of architecture photography is not very poetic, it's not very interesting, that a lot of women are not interested because they think that there's a field which is a bit dry, which I think can be terribly boring. So, or you come and you really think you have something else to say, or maybe it's not really where you want to. I don't think there's a discrimination in that field, and I want to encourage every young woman to say no. Actually, it is a beautiful profession if you bring your own layer to it, and there's a role also. You can maybe allowed to rethink what is space, rethink, maybe make more social study of a place, poetic study of a place, and the field is there and it's open, and it's, if you work hard, you do it.